Our next question. There's an open request from Austin ISD's Equity Office for a third-party equity assessment. Do you support an independent equity assessment for AISD? If not, why not? If so, what do you hope the district might learn from it? Piper.
Thanks, Candace. I absolutely support an external equity audit. I think one of the things that happens is that, well, first of all, families in AISD know that there's a problem. You don't have to, we know, you talk to families and they're the experts, right? They know that there's racism. They know that their children aren't being treated in the way that they should. I think it was Dr. Terrence Green that said, we know what the problem is. Let's do something about it. And that's absolutely true. We need to listen to those families. We need to listen to Dr. Holly, who's started us on a great process. But so often, for good and for bad, as humans, we need some sort of external expert to come in and tell us. And that's when we actually start listening. And while that's often not fair, I think it's another place that we need, that's another reason that we need that external equity audit, to have somebody come in. And we're seeing that in organizations across the country. People need that external voice to give them some guidance. I think some of the things that would come out of that audit, one of the things I hope would come out of that audit, is that we need more training. We need more training for administrators, for teachers, for the board. I think the board thus far has received 2 hours of undoing racism training. And I think Dr. Holly was the one who had to do it, which is not fair to her to train her bosses. So what we need is external training. I'm hoping that that's one of the things that comes out. I'm hoping another thing that comes out is that we need a district-wide anti-racism statement that isn't just for the district, but it goes to each individual campus. And I would love to see every single campus have an anti-racism statement about what they're doing, making sure that they have all the right tools in place, whether it's supplies, whether it's books, whatever it is, to make every kid feel comfortable. And finally, I'm hoping that that equity audit would do a lot of work to look at disaggregated data around what kids are being disciplined, what kids are not being disciplined, about what teachers are being fired, about what teachers are not being fired, about who's being promoted. Disaggregated data along the way, I think would really help.
Thank you. You mentioned that you wanted to see what you wanted to see come out of it. Part of this equity sort of assessment or audit, whichever word you want to put to it, is going to deal with finances and resources. What do you hope to learn about the allocation of resources?
Sorry, I was making sure I wasn't on mute. Well, I think that we have a system where certain communities are getting resources that others are not getting. And I think there's multiple tiers of that. But I think that that's one of the pieces that we have to look at. I think I mentioned my kiddo's elementary school, which has great resources. And I've done work with a school in Dove Springs, and the resources are not the same. And that's a difference that's not fair. It doesn't make sense in 2018 that you would have two schools 4 miles from each other and have such a difference in resources. And so I'm hoping that whether we're looking at teachers and what kinds of teachers and what level of expertise teachers are having at the different campuses, whether we're looking at what resources the schools have access to, that has to be a part of that audit.
Thank you. Jennifer, the same question.
Thanks, Candace. Yes, I do support an external assessment. I would like to see the external assessment become part of a routine, periodic, something that is periodically done every few years. AISD had an internal equity assessment in 2016 that did include a third-party assessment of our curriculum. And that internal audit led to important reforms on code of conduct and some discipline policies. So what we need now is something that will build on that work and tell us where we most need to make improvements. The issues that I think are top priority are looking at our achievement gap, the opportunity gap. We know that our white students are scoring higher on STAR reading levels, and third grade, they're scoring much higher than their Black and brown peers, and it's a chronic issue. We have not been able to address that. So I would like to see some recommendations on how to immediately prioritize that, changing that. We also need to look at our discipline policies. I would like to see an equity assessment that tells us what we need to do first. Having that built in on a periodic basis will give us a continuum that lets us track our progress and will hold us accountable for when we're not meeting our goals. It will also hold us accountable for when we implement a policy and whether or not it's effective, because we know that sometimes we check the box and make a policy and think we're done, and it turns out that it doesn't have the intended effect. It doesn't solve the problem.
Thank you so much. Lynn, the question again is, would you support a third-party equity assessment? If so, if not, why not? If so, what do you hope the district might learn from it?
Yeah, thank you, Candace. I absolutely support an equity audit, and I'm bothered that it hasn't happened yet. We've been talking about this for a while, and I think it needs to go much farther than that 2016 audit went. We need to measure what we value. And I think we've done a lot to measure test scores and discipline policies. Those things matter. But we also need measures of lived experience. I've spent time on more than 80 campuses in Austin AISD, and I've heard people's stories of what's working, what's not, of how school makes them feel, of what keeps them coming back and what drives them away. And any solid equity audit has to look at that as well. I really believe strongly that once we have a shared set of data to understand, that's the foundation for making good decisions. It's a foundation for community conversations about what we do with what we learn and what we already know. I believe that student voice needs to be a significant part of this process. Students have a very important place in this. Ultimately, this is about students. I think this needs to be an ongoing process. This is not a one and done. This needs to be part of AISD's culture to look honestly and openly at what's working and what isn't. And by not talking about it, we're not fooling anyone. People know what the lived experience is. People know what the data show. People know what's working and what isn't. And there are schools that work really well all over Austin. I think that's something else that we need to look at, is where we're having success and where we aren't, and learn from that. I think we also need a system for ensuring fidelity of the policies that we currently have and the policies that we create. Austin ISD, for example, has banned taking recess away from children as a consequence for behavior, and yet schools are still doing it. We need fidelity measures to make sure that the things we vow are really happening, and we need a board that's ready to hold the superintendent accountable when things aren't being done as our community expects.
Thank you. I do have just a follow-up question for that. You are, of course, being in District 5, if we have an audit or an assessment to happen, and it showed that there were a disproportionate amount going to D5, would you, in your position, vote to reallocate those resources to other districts?
I think that's a decision for our community. And what I hope is that we could find that answer together as a community by talking about it. I have faith that District 5 can be strong, even if we are giving more to other schools. But I also believe that District 5 has deep needs. 20% of the students in District 5 are economically disadvantaged. That's not the picture that people think of when they think of District 5. District 5 does not have parent support specialists for those students. I think we need to be thinking about the resources we have and how we're deploying them. I also feel like we need to advocate strongly for more funding district-wide. We need to fight the reasons people are leaving for charters. We need to do that as well. So I think strategic funding for things like teacher retention, things like that are important, but I also think we've had great success in Austin ISD adding programs like early college, high school, adding some very strong programs that don't take away from anyone and that are giving to students who need that the most.